Welcome back, troglodytes, to the Trogley's Guitar Show. We have a beauty here today. My favorite type of Les Paul, a prehistoric, and this is the earliest one that I have personally owned. This is a 1983 59 reissue, essentially. Now, to put a little bit of a backstory on why these prehistorics are just so darn special and cool, let's take a look at the history of Gibson. The Norland era of Gibson starts pretty much in 1969. That's when they started changing the body constructions of these from the 50s style to the new wave. That includes things like pancake bodies, where they have a little maple center to them, and that also includes the introduction of the Nashville-styled bridge instead of the ABR1. And then in mid-75 to 76, they started transitioning all Les Pauls into maple necks. Now, that makes a lot of people really upset and hate the Norland era of Gibson simply because they're different. So that's why a prehistoric is so special. In a time where Les Pauls weren't a 59-60 style, these were. Now, Gibson did not realize that there was such an awesome market for a 59 style Les Paul. It was actually particular dealers that noticed this first. We're talking Strings and Things, Leo's Music, Jimmy Wallace, Guitar Trader. Shops like those actually did small runs of 59-60 styled reissues, and they sold very well for them. And that's kind of when Gibson was like, maybe we should start making these on our own as well. So you can start to see these early prehistorics as early as 1980. Now, the Strings and Things do predate that a little bit. In 1980, on the backs of the headstocks, you'll find some that have a pearl plaque. This is not one of those. Those are some of the earlier ones. The first mass run of guitars that Gibson tried to do was called the Heritage 80 series. They had a standard version, which was a rosewood fretboard, and they also had an elite version with an ebony board. Those things sold really well because they looked good, but they had the Nashville style bridge, not the ABR1, and they didn't have the inked on serial number stamp. So those aren't quite prehistorics in my eyes, but the Heritage 80 series is a really cool looking one, and they play nicely. So what one is this one? Is this a special dealer reissue type? No, it's just a really early 1983 59-60 styled reissue. Now, I've had quite a few of these. I had one that had a spectacular flame top, kind of like this one, but it had an expert repair on it, and that one still brought in $2,500 on eBay at an open auction. So this one has been collector owned since day one. This was originally owned by a doctor. He bought it brand new, hardly played the thing. And then unfortunately he got caught with his secretary, so court ordered had to get rid of his guitar collection. So I nicknamed this one the Infidelity Burst. Poor guy had to give up his collection. I've already briefly touched on this, but what makes this guitar so special is it has factory nickel hardware when they were only using chrome. You have an ABR1 bridge that is drilled directly into the wood. There is no posts. You have these little thumb bleeders here, and you have a 59 style knob on here. These knobs are actually very special and were used on only the early prehistorics. They kind of changed the look of them in the later 80s. It has those highly revered Tim Shaw PAFs. You have the return of the mahogany neck on this one. Now 83 is kind of a transition year. You will find some other non-prehistoric Les Pauls that have the mahogany, but 84 is typically when you see them all go back to that. You also have the no-line double ring Clouson tuners in nickel, as well as the ink stamp serial number. And what's kind of unique on these earlier ones is they still have the Made in USA stamp there. So that's the only thing that's really not 59 spec, is that stamp. The other spec that's not correct to like a modern day historic or a real 59 or 60 is these do still retain the short neck tenon they were using from this time frame. They did not get the long tenon. Now, I always hesitate calling these prehistoric reissues 59s because the bulk majority of them you get have like 60 styled necks on them. They're very thin. This is the first prehistoric that I've had that has a little bit of a chunkier neck. I would actually call this one nearly that 59 style. However, the finish is definitely very reminiscent of a 1960 Burst because they don't quite fade out as much as like the 59s. So no, these guitars are not as accurate as today's reissues. However, if you're not really a stickler for wanting, everything to be 100% 59 spec, I think you'll come to really enjoy these guitars simply because they represent a time in Gibson history where the company was completely changing. The 50s is generally seen as their golden era. Then you've got the 60s where they introduced the SG. They're still pretty good. And then the 70s and 80s, they get a bad rap. They really do, but they're not even that bad of guitars. It's just people hate them because they're different. But these 80s prehistorics show the light at the end of the tunnel. And basically, Gibson's bread and butter nowadays are their historic reissues. So personally, I could care less about a modern day reissue. I get it, they're great guitars, but I don't think they'll ever necessarily be collectible unless they're a limited edition of some sort and made in very small numbers and are highly desirable. Now these prehistorics, these are the things that get me pumped up because they just represent such a beautiful time in Gibson history, and they're basically a 59 reissue, but they're older. So overall, I highly suggest checking out a prehistoric. If you're not as much into the history of the guitars, maybe a modern day historic would be more correct for you. But if you like what these represent, that's where they become very special. And I always get really excited when I can get an early version of these, or any prehistoric for that matter. Guitar is actually fairly heavy for a 59 style guitar at 10 pounds 1.8 ounces. And again, I would say it has almost a 59 neck profile to it. It's not as slim as most of the other prehistorics I've had. Alright, let's go ahead and look at the condition of this guitar. Now as far as an early prehistoric goes, I don't think you'll find one too much cleaner than this one. It's not mint condition. I wouldn't say it's necessarily been gigged ever, but it kind of has a little bit of wear because, oops, I banged the guitar taking it out of the case, or it fell down on top of it. It's got a little bit of use to it. Alright, face of the headstock is fairly clean. You can see the lacquer has not aged hardly at all. That is a beautiful crisp Gibson logo, and that's what really sold me on this guitar, because usually you'll see them aged a little bit, which is cool, but it's also nice to have a very clean example. Now once we get the light on it, you can see there is some light chipping by the washers of the tuners. That's pretty natural to see on these Kluson style tuners, because there's a lot of pressure that's put on these little plates by them. But overall it's not too noticeable and doesn't really destroy the look of the guitar simply because the lacquer hasn't aged. Once the lacquer ages, that will start to become more apparent. The truss rod works flawlessly. It's like brand new. I love it when I get a truss rod that I don't have to fight. Now this guitar does retain its original nut. You can see there's a little bit of natural wear around it, but nothing that looks too bad. Now over the years, I believe the nut slots might have became a little bit too worn down, and the collector who owned this guitar did not want to replace anything on it. So there's some sort of substance that's kind of hard that was put on top of the nut. It was likely used to fill in those nut slots so they could be refiled correctly. So you do kind of have that differentiating color on the top that kind of makes it look like an older nut than it is. Now the frets, you can see they show some minor flattening, but for the most part they're in good shape. The rosewood fretboard is also in good condition. Now right here you can see there is a little bit of a fingernail impression right there, but that's the worst of it, is just in that area. The rest of the fretboard is in good shape. And once again, just very minor fret wear, nothing too much. You still have the original nibs over the frets. They're nice and small, vintage styled. And again, right up here on the fretboard, you get some very nice figuring to the rosewood. It just has that really cool wavy pattern to it right there. Now you do have the fret sprouting lines here. Those are caused when the wood expands and contrasts in different temperatures and humidities, so you'll see that on pretty much every Gibson after a few years. But those are on both sides of the fretboard. Now this guitar has an awesome two-piece flame maple top. The flame pattern is very thin, but it's not the kind that's perfectly straight. It's got a little bit of character to it. So here in the lighting, you can see the lines, but what really makes these 80s tops extra special is usually the grain pattern will run perpendicular to the flame, so it kind of gives you a checkered board look. Now in person, what you see is the wood grain underneath those vertical lines. And then this guitar just gets really bright in certain areas because of the flame. It really is quite an interesting top on this one, and one of the most evenly flamed ones that I have seen. Now it does have some wear. Once we get it in the light here, you can see a few small dings right there. I mean, it's just been lightly played over the years as part of a collection. You're gonna see some handling marks here from me just holding it now. But beautiful top on this one. You can see some smudges. Now there's really no major nicks or dings on the top. You can see just a little bit, but for the most part the top is very, very clean, minus some polishing swirls and whatnot. Again, you have your original Tim Shaw PAFs, short neck tenon, factory nickel ABR1, nickel covers, and stop tailpiece here. Now the back of the guitar, serial number is 3. It kind of looks like a 9 though. Then you have 0010. Now what that means is this is the 10th 59 reissue that they made in 1983. Now as far as the condition goes, you can see there is kind of a little ding right here. I'm not quite sure what caused that. He's probably taking it out of the case saying, hey buddy, look at this, then bing, hits it against the ceiling or something. I know I did that with my brand new Les Paul Custom, the first Les Paul I ever bought. It's like, great. So luckily no breaks, cracks, or repairs, but you do have that small ding there, as well as some light scratches and scuffs. but overall fairly clean. Now what I like about this neck is there is a little bit of flame to it. Not a lot, you don't see figured mahogany that often, but you can see that there is some to this neck, and it is one piece, and it is a beautiful specimen. We've got some very light wear, but nothing too much to really go over here on the back of the neck. But again, it is break, crack, and repair free with some very nice figuring to it. Now the back of the guitar is not chewed up, but it's not mint condition either. We'll get it in the light here, and then you'll see some very small impressions, as well as some very light buckle indentationing right there. But overall, I would say it's a fairly clean back. It's got some light wear, so you're not completely scared to touch this thing because it already has a little bit of wear to it. You do have the correct brown back plates. Now something that I thought was interesting is this still retains that shielding tin plate. Some people call it like an ashtray. I almost would have guessed that they would have done a traditional ground wire, but I was wrong. Another little cool feature here is that they did go back to the plastic jack plate here. Now the sides probably show the most amount of wear here. You're gonna see some impressions and light dings. I mean, that right there is the worst ding on the guitar. It is through the finish. It's a little bit of a shame that it's there, but I do want to make sure that I am showing that to its full potential there. That is definitely the worst thing about the condition of this guitar. I'm guessing the case caught it on its way down one day. But other than that, you just have some light impressions and light dings. Again, this guitar is all original down to the strap buttons. Nothing has really ever been touched. You can see you've got some impression lines right there. Another thing this guitar does have is the thin binding in the cutaway. You can see the maple top exposed. That's a 59 feature there for you. Alright, let's do a blacklight test. Here you can see the face of the headstock and the tuner tips are glowing the way they should. The body is also a nice even glow here, and the knobs are glowing the way they should as well. Back of the headstock, we are all clear here. No finished touch-ups, breaks, cracks, or repairs to speak of. Back of the neck doesn't have any finish wear from playing. And the back of the guitar in general is also glowing the way it should. And the sides are also looking very nice and clean. So overall, yes, this one definitely passes the blacklight test. Alright, unfortunately, the original case for this guitar must have got lost in that collector's collection when he was selling it due to the court order. Or maybe the wrong case went with the wrong guitar at one point in time, but this one came to me with like a late 90s, early 2000s Gibson case. And this is an example of where I gave a guitar its original case back. This is the 80s styled Lifton reissue case. They are beautiful cases. This one is well worn. It doesn't really match the condition of the guitar, but hey, it's an original style case. The biggest thing to go over on this case is it looks like there's quite a few areas where the Tolex was glued back down. I mean, the case is still structurally sound, but you are having some rips and tears to the Tolex. The condition of this case is definitely not complimentary to the guitar, but at least it is the original case. If you'd rather have a Gibson USA case with this guitar, I will gladly substitute it, but even these things, in as worn condition as they are, they sell for quite a bit of money. Now the handles of these things are notorious for falling off. This looks like telephone wire to me. You can see it's just kind of tied on there. I trust it for the most part. I mean, it's not like a loose piece of string. It does have that support inside of the wire, so it works for the most part. But this case does have 4 latches. You have 3 on the front and a single one on the back. And the inside is this pink interior. I mean, if you're using this to display the guitar, I would say the inside of the case looks a lot cleaner than the outside. You can see you've got some light wear, but overall, I would say the inside of the case is definitely respectable. Now, as far as a protective case goes, no, they're not the best. They only have some heel support and only a single neck rest, but hey, that's how the original Liftons were too, and you do have a nice case compartment in here. If you think you might be interested in this guitar, feel free to contact me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Troglys, Troglys. However, I believe this one's already been spoken for. Thank you for watching, Troglodytes. I hope you learned something new, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.